Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Nitsitapi, Sutina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is February 11th, 2025. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy hearing Indigenous content by this Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to previous donors for showing your support. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You could go to nativecalgarian.com for more information and my pin posts on social media. And always remember to share the things you learn to your network. Oki, naganago, meko che, chestokom aki. Nara dago de quotes nogo tene siku seradi. Hi, my name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake Tribe in Treaty 11 in Delaney. I am a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Clinchotine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name, which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces. My late great-grandfather is Milo Bewell from Delaney. His daughter, Alice, is my now late great-granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and all the fun ableism that we have here with land theft. I'm not a social worker, nor am I an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous people, but I share my journey as an Dene mom, navigating this colonial, racist, ableist, racist, misogynistic world in 2025. I think of this today. I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for the so-called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by capitalism and colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As a former drafter, I would be happy to teach you more. You have to pay me. You have to go to nativecalgarian.com for more if you want to know. So today I have a really good friend of mine on the show. He was kind enough to have me on his, and I thought it was really important for my friend to be here. Dave, would you like to introduce yourself in your way?
Sure. Yeah, I'm David Lurie. I don't even know what to say about myself, to be honest. Like it's such a weird. I don't think about it when we were sitting down together. I don't we know each other, right? So I introduce myself. Yes, I am. I'm obviously a settler. Like I'm a white settler. I was raised in the church. I was raised to be a Zionist, actually, like I literally was. That was a part. Not that anyone say we're training you to be a Zionist, but that's just how the indoctrination worked, right? Like was, I mean, by the time, and I didn't know much about world history when I was a teenager. So by the time I was like 14, we all knew that you just don't mess with Israel, right? Like And so we were raised on that principle. They could do no wrong kind of thing. And so I guess that's me in a nutshell. I am a preach kid. I was born in Oregon, in Portland, and I lived in LA, just outside of LA in LA County. And for a few years, we bounced around because my dad was a preacher. It was kind of like, from what I understand of like military kids, it was kind of the same. Like, would they bounce around a lot too? So, anyway, that's me in a nutshell. And oh, sorry, I'm a queer man. So, like, one of these things that I'm trying to do is get better at owning that in different spaces. Like, I'm really comfortable in my space, right, to do it. And it's like it's really like so I I'm already starting to gab, right? Like, you're gonna have to totally reel me in. Um, I just love talking to you. And last night I went to a group put on by Steve from Stonewall. It's queer recovery oriented group, and honestly, it was the first space I felt like comfortable enough to actually acknowledge what I really want, and that's been really hard for me, and a lot of that has to do with my upbringing for sure, but I think most of it has to do with me now, is like
Mm.
trying to not to resisting the urge to go back and be safe,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Um,
anyway, that's kind of me in a nutshell, I guess.
I think it's really important to talk about all of these things. I don't think you're rambling at all. I'm a big supporter of your organization, Freedom's Path Recovery. I want you to talk more about that. I'm also a big fan of Stonewall Recovery, because at the end of the day, our people, Indigenous people, have been displaced. And so we're a huge part of the homeless population. But because we experience
Disproportionately a part of.
colonialism and
Mhm,
racism and sexism and misogyny within our own communities,
mhm.
folks who identify as two-spirit or queer are disproportionately on the streets as well. And
Mhm,
so, as you know, like for the white community, a disproportionate amount are queer, and that's
mhm.
because our well-meaning, loving Christian families just kick out all of the queers,
Yeah.
and it's wrong. And of course, once you and I have taken the well-variety training, and once you have new traumas, that manifests itself into um, possible addiction issues as well.
Mhm,
And so, you have all of this underlying trauma that's never addressed because it's very hard to find safe spaces to talk
mhm,
about colonial violence, to talk about, homophobia, transphobia, anti-queer violence in general. Misogyny. I'm dealing with that all the time, and
mhm,
the world is set up for me as a straight cis. The world is set up so that I am going to see Ryan Reynolds kissing a girl every time I turn on the TV.
mhm.
So to so-called normalize that. However,
Yeah.
I very rarely see Indigenous people on screen, very rarely hear colonial violence talked about in, circles like this one that's meant to help or to help people in recovery in addiction. But when you have racism within the queer community, it's really hard for some of our people to feel safe in those spaces too. So that's why,
Mhm.
for me, I'm really glad that you're not just in that space for yourself, but also for my community, because I know if somebody were to say, something that was racist, you'd be the first to speak up about it.
I'm definitely getting better at that. It's been a process, like
Yeah.
as I think we were going to talk about, like that kind of, I suppose that's allyship, right? And that's what I've come to understand more about allyship from folks like you, obviously, and others who in the city who just constantly stand up for what's right, right? Like, and I mean, I know there's probably not a lot of like patting on the back for activists because most of the time there's trauma and pain involved, right? And folks can have a real hard time with that, like I do, just like anyone else. Um, but it's like one of those things that I've come to understand that being an ally means you have to be active, right? Like it's not like there was a time where I thought allyship was, and this was a long time ago now, but still there was a time, and I thought it meant thoughts and prayers to your communities, right? Like that's kind of where we were raised, right? To be like, hey, um, we'll send you thoughts and prayers, and that'll be our allyship. And obviously, I was quickly, thankfully, re-educated on that fact by many people saying, no, that's not enough, right? And so I understand how hard it is to navigate intersectional communities, right? Like because most of us have been wounded, right? So there's usually trauma involved. And I know for me, I'm no different, right? So it's one of those things that makes it hard for us, I think, to come together. But I think it makes it more important that we have to,
Yeah.
right? Like we have to find a way because um, we we're the only friends we have. You know what I mean? For the
Yeah.
most part, and we're seeing that. And I'm sure I don't know what it. Fuck, I can't imagine. Uh, am I okay to swear a little bit? I'll try not to, because
Yeah. Give
like,
her.
okay, because I have so much love and respect for you. I would never want to like um dishonor you
Oh
like by
God.
that. So
No, I've
um,
given myself a lot more permission to swear. I was very like I held it in order to
mhm,
navigate like white code. It's just point blank. I was
yeah,
white coding, and understanding now that no matter how much I white code, they will never fully respect me, nor understand
yeah,
me, nor care to do all of those things. And that, obviously my personal boundaries regularly, um, you know, um, gone over. So I
mhm,
rightfully have the, anger to say, fuck you.
mhm.
So I have no
Yeah,
problem swearing now because I've given
right on.
myself permission to no longer, um, hold that in order to
Mhm.
white code, in order to be, palatable to the
Yeah.
colonizer. Yeah.
I appreciate that because that's also for me something I'm trying to do to be a better ally, right? Because I know that like I'm a white person, so sometimes I have gotten through I think a lot of my white fragility, but that doesn't mean I'm not white and fragile. Like that really doesn't mean that. It just means that I'm aware, right? That these things are in me because of how I was taught to live,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm 50 and I now realize that my whole life we were segregated, right? Like, and
Yeah.
segregated on purpose.
Yes.
Not because people were malicious. Not everybody was, of course not. Like, but we were separated on purpose because that's just how it always is,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so even though slavery ended in the States, there was still segregation, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, I mean, I'm sure it was the same up here. Like,
Yeah.
I honestly, I was really young going to school here, so I have a hard time remembering because there was a lot of dark shit going on back then for me.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well,
I
I do
know in
try
the
to talk
States.
about it, and I do try to raise awareness to that segregation. Obviously,
Mhm.
both in the States and Canada, we have,
Yeah,
Indian jurisdiction where the reserves up in Canada or the reservations down south, like those are a form of segregation that Hitler thought was freaking amazing. That is
I
totally,
know.
we should totally do that. So did South Africa. Um,
Yep.
but on top of that, when it comes to especially the Black community, it is February, so it's the Black History Month. Um,
Fucking A.
and they're under attack right now. Google took off Black History Month off of Google. And yeah, and the president obviously attacking DEI initiatives in general. It's really important. When I was running municipally, it was very obvious that the realtors had what's called a red line. And a red
Mhm.
line is like, oh, this is where you put people of color. And so
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
happened here. Nenshi talked about it actually when he first ran
Mhm.
for mayor. And I follow a lot of, Black urban developers having that conversation about racism and
Mhm.
purposeful segregation and
Yeah.
hostile designs that are going into municipalities. Because I did take that urban look at called under the umbrella of safety, right? Like CPAP, where it's like
Mhm.
environmental design intended for safety. But unfortunately, because it's not anti-racist, it really does perpetuate racism. And so
Mhm.
trying to have those discussions with people I found to be very, pointless, actually, unfortunately. But I have found a community outside of mainstream acceptable white coding politics to
Mhm.
have those further discussions and have them with activists if they so choose. So,
Yeah,
that's kind of it. The segregation is real. It is done by
yeah,
policy, and it is
yeah.
out there for folks to see if they're willing to. And I think right now in our world that nobody's talking about this, and I don't know why. Um, all of our politicians, every single elected of one, is a landlord. Every single one of them.
Yeah,
But the
I
folks
know.
from overseas have figured out the loopholes on how to buy and sell houses here, even though they don't
Mhm.
even live here. And our rents are atrocious now as a result. And
Yeah.
people are living on the streets despite there being empty houses. So my hope is, well, I'm naive and unfortunately an
I would
optimistic.
never describe you as naive. I would never
You know,
describe
I,
you as
I
that.
I know there are
Yeah.
solutions to solve this. I just have zero faith in white supremacist politicians to do the right thing.
Mhm.
And for those who are like, "Well, Nenshi was a person of color, and your new mayor is too," I'll just say white coding is still white
Mhm.
coding. It's a lot of people of color have multiple levels of racism to unpack, including the white
Mhm.
coding. If I've had to be 48 to give myself permission to swear,
Mhm.
before I seen it, and I still do see it as very violent language when you swear,
Mhm.
but but it's because I grew up in domestic violence, and that's
Yeah.
part of my childhood trauma of seeing swearing and violence interconnected. But now that
Mhm.
I'm older and obviously not a violent person, giving myself to say, well, that's some bullshit.
Yeah. No doubt.
It's a very different frame of mind to come from, and
Yeah.
obviously articulating it. I heard a Mormon. They taught me that swearing is just lazy grammar, and I think that
Mm.
that can be true. And so I really
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
said those things to myself in order to
Mhm.
not swear and tried to find the words to articulate why something was just bullshit. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, when I say, well, that's just racist, people get
Mhm.
I might as well have said the C word in Canada. And I will say it on my podcast from time to time, but
Yeah.
it's racism is that, or white supremacy is that word of, oh my God, I can't believe you
Mhm.
said that out loud. And I
Yeah.
just think it's the funniest thing in the world to see that reaction from people. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I've quit saying, I've quit holding in that's just
Mhm.
racism because it needs
Yeah.
to be said, and I have to say it. Like I can't hold that anger in. I can't hold
Yeah.
that lie in to placate white fragility anymore. So
Yeah, yeah, and you're not alone. I mean, I'm glad that I'm not alone in that. I'm trying so hard, like because it's one of those things where you tolerate something for so long and you become a part of it, right? Even if you're not engaging
yeah,
in active types of racism, you're still engaging in the biases. Like that's where I was definitely a part of that, right? Like, and when you say how did white coding?
yeah,
Like I love that. It's like you can and I call it like, cop talk, but it's white coding, right?
hmm,
It's code for we don't give a shit. Like, you
yeah,
know what I mean? Like when a
yeah,
cop talks a victim out of laying a charge,
yeah,
it's like, we don't give a shit. That's
yeah.
white coding for we don't give a shit,
It's white
right?
coding, it's
Because,
paternal as well. Like
yeah.
the patriarchy rules, right? And typically
Yeah.
it is men and even women in those
Mhm.
situations. Many of them, again, conform to patriarchy in order to succeed in this patriarchal
Mhm.
system. So, yeah, I feel you. I know what you're saying, and I couldn't
Right
agree
on.
more. Yeah,
Yeah. Fucking A. And I think like I want to be able to swear more too because I was as you were saying that about the Mormons, I'm like, yeah, like what a bunch of colonialists, loyal colonialists, keeping us from getting angry, right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
sometimes if people like if I'm engaging with other white folks, it's a challenge, right? Like because a lot of us are so entrenched in the benefits, right, of culture as it is,
Hmm.
that it's hard to see that there's so many people who aren't benefiting. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Because
Yeah.
they're just so certain that everyone has the same opportunity as them, not realizing that that's just not true,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
based on so many different reasons.
Yeah.
Racism being a fundamental one for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, of course, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I am very concerned about, you know, the ongoing suppression of our anger too.
Mhm.
I think we have
Yeah.
to give ourselves, as well as, anyone who's oppressed, permission
Yeah.
to, obviously not violently, but to express
Hmm.
their anger. And
Yeah.
even I'm trying to unpack that within myself of, what is healthy ways to release that anger. That's actually what my counselor suggested to me the last time I had
Hmm.
seen her was that, you she gave me some tools. I Googled it and I seen some other tools. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think that suppressing anger is a real health issue that
Yeah.
we are all facing oppression. There's no one immune to that. So if you're facing oppression, what is the constructive way to deal with it? And I think for both you and I, we've gone through the process, gone through the process, and there's still no change, right?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
have the right to express our anger openly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and not only is there change in what we were hoping for, there's like absolute change in the other direction. Like
Oh yeah.
it seems to, like, you know what I mean? Like double
Yeah.
down and triple down on the same
Yeah.
old shit,
And
right? And
weaponizing the language we taught them against us. And so
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
incredibly like
Hmm.
mind-boggling. It actually
Yeah.
shows why I should have just never helped them to begin with. But I think too, I needed to learn my lesson about,
Of course you
trying
did.
to
Yeah.
engage constructively with politicians,
Yeah.
with police, with,
Yeah.
organizations that claim they want change, but don't
Hmm.
actually do any of that work. So,
Yeah.
and
They want to have the ability to perform, right?
yeah, I
Yeah.
call it, I just, for non-Indigenous people listening, I just want to kind of bring it down to a really simple thing. When I first had my child and we were trying to find the right school for them, I just asked the question to all of the open houses, like, what are your bullying policies? And of course, every single one, oh, we have bullying policies. And I'm like, okay, can you tell me what it is and tell me an example of how it worked? And then
Hmm.
silence. And you can say the
Oh
same thing for racism, right?
yeah.
Like, oh, I'm sure you do have anti-racism policies. Can you tell me a time that it's worked? Can you show me stats where people of color have been able to not just be in your organization, but
Hmm.
thrive, and that they have equal pay and that they have equal chance of advancement? And how come all of the people I'm talking to are not people of color?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's the same thing where it's really performative to have a policy that says we're against bullying, we're against racism, but what are your
Yeah.
actions? So,
Well, yeah, we're seeing that when you mentioned Google going backwards, right? It's like that is a prime example of it, of
yep,
just being like, you know what? We're just performing. We don't really care.
yep,
Like those that, will make knockoff um, Every Child Matter t-shirts and sell them and take the money. Like that same idea, right? It's just, or Pride Month, these businesses. Like I told a straight acquaintance of mine, this was a couple of years ago, but I told him, I said, because he was like, well, you wouldn't go into a place that you didn't think they were queer friendly, and I'm like, no fucking chance would I go in there. If I heard they're not queer friendly, I am avoiding that place like the plague, even if they have a flag up, right? Like
yeah, yep,
I know churches that go through the whole process coming affirming, and they are not a thing at all.
yeah.
So the church performs, everybody performs, especially when it comes to making a buck, right?
Well, and if
um,
it was true, you would see a reduction in homeless youth, but you don't.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, 100% would. You'd see a reduction in suicides
yeah,
in our community, in the Two Spirit LGBTQ plus community, right? Like
yeah,
there would be less spike of that stuff when it does happen. I mean, not that not people report on it anyway. right? Because for a lot of people, it's just like probably the benefit of our society that lots of us die, right? And there's folks out there that don't believe people feel that way, but I have come to understand there are people that feel that way, right?
Yeah,
They
me as well.
literally feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
I
just
think
talking about
anyone
queer,
who
but it was,
doesn't believe that, though, like, it's online.
yeah.
Like, it's
I
online
think
and
it's an
it has been
incredible
online.
privilege to, yeah, it's an incredible privilege to avoid that truth, right?
Yeah.
Like the truth that there are folks like every day punished just existing, right? And of course, like your average person would never know that, right? Because we don't even recognize that we're being segregated in the time we're in kindergarten. So how are we supposed to know the other stuff,
Yeah.
right? Because we're so entrenched in it. And I mean, I'm speaking for myself. I was so entrenched in it that I even chose to go because I knew I made a decision when I got my conditional sentence. And I finished my sentence when I think I was 19 or 20 when I finished it finally. But I made the decision specifically to join state violence instead of like wild violence, right? Like I made the specific choice to go in the army and join the state so that I could take out my violent thoughts and my aggression, all the stuff that I was taught against other people. And I didn't know I was doing that until years later, of course.
Hmm.
Um, Not only fighting for something that I didn't believe in, but also just trying to hide being queer, right? Like, because I realized a lot of my life was a construct that I put up just so that I could hide being queer, you know? And what a strange journey that makes for.
Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah.
Even myself, I've been in counseling my entire life in some capacity, and I really did believe that if I do counseling and I'm trying to be authentic to myself, that I will thrive in this world. And I truly believed that. And now here I'm at 48, looking back at, my 20s of unpacking misogyny, my 30s of unpacking in racism, now 40s colonialism. And now I'm about to hit my 50s and I'm going to be unpacking mental health and realizing that regardless of all of that counseling I had done, I was still placating, right?
Mhm.
And as a result, you kind of have to really look inward and go, okay, well, you tried. You really tried to work within the system to placate, to, adapt with it. And we're regressing as a society. We
Mhm.
are absolutely regressing, and I
Yeah.
can't regress. Like that's not an option for me. Happy for other people who can somehow pretend like, their daughter doesn't exist or something, but not me. Like I can't do that. So,
You
um,
have to have that in you to be able to regress back to it. Like,
you
yeah.
know, Mercedes is this TikTok content creator from the States, and I think she identifies as non-binary, but she's definitely in the queer community. And
Mhm.
she just outright said, "Look, those Trump supporters, it's not that like Trump is a bad person. Just point blank, he's a bad person and their supporters are just bad people. They just had a leader to, vote for to continue their bad thoughts and feelings
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
no, they're just not good people. And I'm just like, I try to when I hear people say things like that, I just
Mhm.
kind of stop and try to, counter it in my head and really I can't. I can't counter
Yeah.
that. And we're at that point where, yeah, it's great to see on TikTok people say, "Oh my God, I so regret voting for Trump." But it's like the damage is done. Like
Mhm.
you've added to this. There
Yeah.
are folks who are trans who feel unheard. I know a lot of the artists and other folks like content creators are trying to say, "Hey, you matter."
Mhm.
But for me personally, like it's very I don't know if my voice will matter more than hearing the President of the United States say it. You know,
Yeah.
um, hearing the way people
Well,
talked about Trudeau when he was queer
mhm.
friendly. It's like, I
Yeah.
get people not liking Trudeau for a million reasons, but if your
For
reason
sure,
was
there's lots.
because he, was because he was pro queer, then you are
Hmm.
not a person I share values with in any capacity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Me neither. It's very tough, right? And it's tough to. I can see the difficulty and the struggle with not labeling people bad and good, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of the same as I try to keep in mind when people say, "Oh, you're a good person," and I say, "No, I'm not necessarily a good person."
Yeah.
Like you're catching me at a moment where you think I'm good, right? Like, but there are moments where you will absolutely think I'm not, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you got inside my head. Like, it's just, I think part of being human,
Yeah.
right? Is that we're not good, bad people. We're just human people. We're just
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many complicated rules, but the reality is we're all just fucking people, you
Yeah.
know? But I get it. There's people that actually don't believe other humans are humans, and that's part of the issue.
Yeah.
I could never conceive of that. I just can't. Like that is absolutely insane to me. Yeah,
I know.
insane.
And that's the whole thing. Like I think of the difference
Yeah.
between me and conservatives. Even when I know a conservative is gay, I don't out them. That's not
Mhm.
my value system. Um,
That's because you honor queer people, and that's why most of us, well, lots of us love you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of back to that though too. Like I'm so problematic and imperfect. And so
Hmm.
like when people when I struggle with compliments, um,
Hmm.
really and truly because so many times it's been a backhand really.
Yeah.
In so many ways. So it's hard because I'm imperfect, I'm
Hmm.
problematic, I don't mean to be. I try to do better. I try to say sorry. And I think that is a key difference too between the conservative and liberals. It's that like I am willing to
Hmm.
say sorry. And I don't feel
Yeah.
like a lot of conservatives really are. Even in these regrets, like they're not saying they're sorry. They're just saying,
Yeah.
ugh, I made a mistake.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's strange, right? It's a lot like the battle between like atheism and like Christianity or religion, right? Like
Yeah.
there's just so many intercolonial construct is my point.
Mm.
Like so much that you have to go through in terms of the day to day, right? It's like so enmeshed in every step of every part of the process.
Yeah.
The misogyny, all those things go. Um, like so much, and so that like last night was the first time in a group of humans where I actually said what I've always wanted, right? Like so we, growing up and trying to like negotiate with my queerness, right? Like, oh my God, like, I have to be gay, like women and all these things, right? But as I get older, I realize, well, okay, but that doesn't mean you can't be gay. And like I've come to understand, right? There's so much more to queerness than that old system of binary understanding, right? And like I love that, and so which being around queer people, obviously, I love that, right? Like I finally was able to tell a group of humans that, oh my God, like all these years and all these wonderful women, some wonderful women that I've met and spent time with, but like all these years, I just really wanted to be with a man, right? Like I just wanted to be with a man, and um, I'm 50, starting to really recognize that, you know. Um, and it's not that I don't find women beautiful. I find women beautiful, like, but
Yeah.
I find all women beautiful,
Yeah.
right? Like I
Yeah.
just same and that has nothing to do with it anymore. I realized that, right? Like it really did. That was one of those trappings though that I fell into with my own colonization, right? Was like, Dave, you can't be queer. Like
Oh,
you have to choose.
it is a hard one watching folks who identify as bisexual. Like, I
Yeah,
see the anti-bisexual rhetoric within the queer community, just like I see
yeah,
racism within the queer community. So it's a
yeah.
tough one, sir. I can't imagine trying to
It is.
navigate that.
Well, and really what I started navigating was that culture, but because honestly, I don't know if I've ever said this on your podcast, but like the worst assault I've ever suffered in terms of like a verbal assault about my bisexuality and about my queerness was from a gay man. It was the most insulting, the most. awful attack that I've ever experienced, to be honest with you.
Sure.
Um, and it didn't deter me. It just made me realize that even within our community, there are folks that believe in one thing, but the rest is not true, right? Like, and it's kind of like, I don't even know how you come to that conclusion, right? Because like people have tried to tell gay men and lesbian women, trans women and men, that they're not real forever, right? And how can we not see that that's happening to others within the community, right? And so that my eyes really wide open, and I love it because obviously the queer community is very diverse, right? And like naturally so, because there's so many queer humans, right? Like I don't know what the definition of queer is anymore, but I think like I'm okay taking that word back because I feel like, man, that's really me. I am
Yeah.
queer, you know?
I've
Yeah.
been asking myself that same question, and I keep coming to the healthy sexuality, unhealthy sexuality. Because,
Hmm.
I'm straight and I'm cis. And I've really
Yeah.
like, are you sure? Like I've really questioned that about myself. Like, are you really, really sure? And I'm like, yeah, no, if I like have the chance, it's gonna be a guy every
Hmm.
time. And
Yeah.
so like I know that's who I am. That's
Hmm.
just a part of my makeup. But it's like
Yeah.
and so many people in the queer community feel safe around me, and I try so hard not to fuck that up because I don't
Hmm.
want to. But I do, and
But you're
I
human like the rest of us.
yeah, exactly, and that's
Hmm.
part of the problem with idols and that like we're imperfect,
Yeah.
but I never want to be that person that's like, oh, you're gay. I feel differently about you because of that.
Hmm.
So anyway, I just see it as like healthy understanding of sexuality versus unhealthy, because
Yeah.
even it doesn't matter if you're like a straight cis person trying to be a good ally or you are a queer
Hmm.
person who's problematic, like there's still unhealthy relationship
Yeah.
concepts and sexuality in there. And I think that's really
Yeah.
what it is. And so you either accept people for who they are or you don't. And
Hmm.
yeah, I
Well, and realize that we've all been colonized in the same way
right.
to hate ourselves, right?
Polyamory is one of those things that I haven't really unpacked that I do want to understand it because,
Hmm.
obviously I'm in a monogamous relationship. You know my husband quite well.
Hmm.
He's the producer and editor for all of our
I love
podcasts.
Darcy.
We love
Yeah.
Darcy,
Yeah.
but
How can you how I don't know how people don't love Darcy. Yeah.
I know. Well, they just don't know him, and he's such a shy
Yeah.
guy. So,
Or they're
um,
wrong.
or they're
Yeah.
just wrong. No kidding. So yeah,
Yeah.
I like obviously we've chosen a monogamous relationship, but a lot
Hmm.
of the nieces and nephews in the queer community, the non-binary, they are having polyamory relationships, and when they ask me advice, I'm like, wow, is this out of my wheelhouse? I'm just honest with them. I'm like, you're
Yeah.
asking a straight cis monogamous relationship person, married woman
Hmm.
about polyamory, and God, I wish I knew what to say and what to do and how to help you through that because I have no idea. And it's not coming
Yeah.
from a judgmental way.
Hmm.
I follow some content creators on TikTok that talk about polyamory in the hopes that I can understand key concepts to then help those who might be in a queer relationship or a polyamory relationship in general.
Hmm.
Because again, I think it's about healthy relationships. It's not necessarily like terminology of binary
Hmm.
monogamy,
Yeah.
polygamy. Like it's a concept. Is this
Hmm.
healthy?
Well, and that was something that we talked about last night was just like the concept, the ideas of do have I ever expected, too much? And I said, yeah, like I was taught that I could not expect a healthy relationship with a man. I was taught that by straight
Wow.
men, but that's what
Wow.
I was taught. I was taught that like the first thing my dad said to me when I came out was, you have to be safe, right? Because he knew what straight men would want to do to me, right? And because that's where he comes from. That's his background, was his background. Um, but like honestly, it yeah, I don't even know where to go from there because it was like gut wrenching, right? When you realize, oh shit, like even my dad, right, like was taught to hate me. Not that he did hate me, he instantly was like, you know what, I love you. I doesn't matter. To him, it was like his mind was changed for him, right? Like when I came out, and that was not expected. I was not expecting that. But yeah, there's this. We were talking about the do I expect too much, and I realized expecting to have a hell much. It's just what I was taught. That's how I was colonized, right? Into that, like into monogamy and well, misogyny, if that was my cup of tea, right? But I mean, and I was asked if I ever had a relationship, like, and I if I even tried to have a loving relationship with a man, and I said no. I always followed my parents' lead and went after women, like because it was safer, right? And I'm not alone there. I know that, and that's why I love being in queer circles because we get to realize that and hear each other's stories and realize how close we are. You know, like uh, there's something to that that just I don't get anywhere else, right? When there's men and they have felt the same way, right? And it's so empowering because I've always been alone with them. I've always kept it to myself, and wasn't able to share who I really am. You know,
Mm.
like I said, if people knew how feminine I really was, like if they knew what I did at home alone, like as a like not just how I dance around and how like I'm just so inside is so much more feminine. And no wonder I was like hurt so much in my life because I was never able to say, hey, stop, like this really hurts me. You know, it was like trying to figure out why, even though I chose state violence to be a part of it for a good portion of my life, because I didn't want to face who I was, right? And I knew that in those environments, it's safe not to,
Mm.
right? Like no one's going to pry and be like, "Are you sure you don't like men?" Like no one's going to ask because nobody wants to know, right? It was like the army. Don't ask, don't tell. We don't care, but if we find out, we're going to kick you out, right? Like um but the same, I mean, it's just that it's almost like those adjustments that were made were even performative in themselves, right? Like,
Mhm.
don't ask, don't tell. What the fuck does that mean, man? That's not like how you encourage people to be like faithful, right? If that's what you're really going after. But the army just wants fodder, right? So that's what armies want. It's what they need. They don't need to understand you
I
to
think,
send you to die.
yeah, and that's a terrible truth, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah.
It's a terrible truth. Going back to healthy relationships in general,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
I grew up in domestic violence and seen, my white father and my Dene mom like fist fighting all the time.
Mm.
So like very aware that the straight couples can be very unhealthy too. And
Yeah.
so, I've said that to my daughter. Like, I don't know what your future looks like. I don't know what your partner's going to look like, who they're going to be, but I want you to be authentically you. And I also want you to be in a healthy relationship because
Mhm.
straight or not, you can be in an unhealthy relationship, right? They just are typically
Exactly.
worse in
Yeah.
situations like you're saying where you're suppressing so many parts of you.
Hmm.
And and I don't want that for anybody.
Yeah.
I relate to it in the sense that as a Dene woman trying to white code, I was always
Hmm.
trying to suppress a piece of me. And
Yeah.
as a woman in an unsafe world, trying to
Hmm.
placate to men just to not be killed or violently attacked. But I mean,
Hmm.
you can't do enough. You can't be enough, right? Like
Yeah.
if they're choosing to hurt you, they're going to hurt you.
Yeah.
So, um,
I love how you word that, that just to be like, you have to be delicate enough and savvy enough
yeah,
to survive, right?
yeah.
It's much like a queer man in a straight man's world. It's like you have to be savvy enough. And if you're not going to play the game and be the stereotypical queer man, then they
Mhm.
don't want you around, right? Like if you're not going to entertain them, they don't want you around
Hmm.
because you make them uncomfortable for some reason. I can't imagine why, but it makes people uncomfortable when you're just around and yourself,
Yeah.
right? Like, And straight folks probably don't even know how easy it is to insult us without trying because they're so used to insulting us. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Yeah, like it's
Yeah.
just so
Ingrained.
flippantly comes out of folks' mouths
Yeah.
that and it's so funny because obviously like nobody really knows somebody until they get to know them.
Yeah.
But what's wrong with going slow? Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with not saying stupid shit the first time you open your mouth meeting someone, right? Like, what's wrong with that? And don't get me wrong, I'm super weird. I'm not talking about weird shit. I have like serious social anxiety. Like, literally, I met someone for
Yes.
the first time yesterday, and we sat in the room silently because we both do while we were alone until
Yeah.
other people came because we were both just like not able to do it,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I don't want to force someone like to do something. Had I not just been like, you know what, like, why don't we just sit quietly? They seem okay. I'm okay. Like, it's okay not to like fill the space, man, with like me potentially insulting someone by talking, because when I open my mouth, words come out. And, and
I know.
sometimes,
And they're weapons, aren't they?
yeah,
I
they
know.
can be.
Yeah.
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 They
I
can be
know.
very like, yeah,
In our community, we talk about like always understanding that, tread lightly in the sense that your words can really hurt people. And,
yeah,
but I was raised white. So yeah, I know
yeah.
that.
You get the I knows, I
Oh, I
know.
know.
Yeah, and we used to say that when I was going to AA, we used to say that all the time because newcomers have the I know, I know, I know. That's
Hmm.
their response to everything you try to like teach them, and they're like, I know, I know, I know, I know, but you just keep doing it anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because until you stop saying I know, it's hard to learn, right? Like, because I mean, that's how I started to learn was I stopped feeling like I knew. I was
Mm.
like, wait, there's so much shit I don't know,
Yeah.
and of course for me books opened up all kinds of doorways in my brain, so I always encourage lots of reading.
Hmm.
And I never used to talk about it until I really met you,
Yeah.
because your book club is incredible.
Mhm.
And honestly, there's so many folks like that have inspired me just to read more. And I forgot like what it was like to read a lot. Like back when I was in school, I used to read constantly, right? And even before I went to university. But then after university, it was almost like the switch went off. I didn't want to read all the time anymore,
Yep.
because there was TV and shit. But now it's like, man, reading is blowing my mind. Like I'm just finishing up a book called The God Delusion, and I've got to tell you, for a Christ for an old Christian kid who was raised Christian, it took me probably 2 years to get it on off my list and into my brain,
Mm.
because it was wrestling with all that religiosity
Yeah.
from growing up,
Yeah.
and then realizing that I'm not a believer, right? That I was totally riding my dad's coattails with his faith because he had enough faith for everybody, man. I just like hung on, probably like a lot of humans did to my dad, right? Just
Yeah.
hang on for dear life, man, because he knows what's going on. Um, but for me, I just don't believe. And so getting to this point in my own journey of being able to read this book, I have to tell you, if you get a chance to read it for sure, even
Mm.
if you're a Christian and whatever, because I just love how it pokes fun at a lot of the stuff that I find funny about it, right?
Yep.
Like, because it's just other people like myself who don't believe that it's anything, right? We just believe that it's another theory of life from humans who create this idea, because that's what humans, man, we are amazing. Do we even know artists? Like, how do you
No.
not just say, wow, those people who came up with this idea, what a brilliant thing that humans did. But instead we have to make it somehow divine, instead of just saying, wow, humans are fucking, man, we can be really smart, right?
Yeah.
um anyway, I
One
could
of
go
my
off on a
favorite
tangent.
books. No, I want to
Yeah.
I want to add to what you're saying. I want to
Okay.
read this book. Obviously because of forced Christianity in the indigenous
Mhm.
community, I didn't really understand like why would you believe this bullshit for like, and I kept asking my family like, but
Yeah.
why? Like what why? Because I wasn't forced to
Yeah.
do it, right? Like I
Yeah.
should have been. I was in the demographic that if I wasn't
Mhm.
with my white dad, I would have been forced to be Christian.
Yeah.
Um, but because I wasn't forced to be and I had some free will, I always thought it
Mhm.
was stupid. I purposely got a question in my science wrong because the answer, there was three choices of what the center, what, how the universe could have been. And
No,
yeah, and one of them was God. And I refused. Now old enough to
no.
have been able to say like, a divine intervention. Maybe I could have lived with that better, but I would rather get that
Yeah,
question wrong, knowing what the answer was because I thought it
yeah,
was wrong, to have God in schools. And I
yes.
was that principled about it then.
I love it. I absolutely love
Yeah.
it because I was
Yeah.
raised like in the States, right, where you had to say the Pledge of Allegiance and there's always
Yes.
God stuff involved.
And it's
Um,
bullshit. And but we're
yeah.
taught to. So anyway, when I was getting older, I read a
Mhm.
really great book I have downstairs called The Pagan Christ, and it was written
Mm,
by a Catholic. He's still Catholic, and he was a Catholic priest, and he's like, went down the road of theology and talked
mhm,
about basically what Christianity stole from the pagan belief system globally. And of course, it's been years since I've read it, so I'm sure I would look at it with a different lens today. But regardless, it was
mhm,
really impactful for me to try to express to Christians who were trying to have a more intellectual conversation with me about Christianity, and me being able to match and understand where they were coming from, but saying, but I still don't believe because, and, having that conversation with them. Now, today, obviously, a very different person about how I have a relationship with my spirit and with spirits. But,
mhm,
you know, I wasn't, and I tried to shut a lot of that off
mhm.
unknowingly because, again, I'm white coding, right? Like, you can't
Yeah.
talk to ghosts because people think you're crazy. And
Yeah,
understanding
except they can
now,
talk to the Holy Ghost. You just can't talk to a ghost.
right? Like the
Yeah.
hypocrisy of it all, right?
Oh my God,
Um,
the whole that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, regardless, different relationship today, obviously, and respect now for to my
Yeah.
community as to why it is that they are still Christian in places
Yeah.
because, I'm not going to be mad at them that colonial trauma caused them to be Christian. I like
Yeah.
that's not in me. So,
Well, you
yeah,
recognize how Christian indoctrination works.
yeah,
You know that it's not like they're doing it without force.
yeah.
So that to me that changes the game, right? Because
Hmm.
now you're doing it by force to people, and in North America and across the planet, it has been enforced.
Yeah.
Like, and force has been used to gain faith by people, which of course now this will just so folks know I'm not quite I don't know what is real and what isn't. So I'm not claiming to know shit. I don't. That's exactly what I'm claiming. I don't know. I think it's equally as likely that Darcy is Jesus than there was ever a Jesus. I think it's equally as likely because if there's a kind soul, right? I mean, why not? It's to me, that's how I see those things is that one religion is just as likely as another because they're all relatively unlikely. But I'm not slagging on them. What I'm getting at is that's another part of the human creative like vibe, right? Is that we
Hmm.
create meaning. And I think it's beautiful how folks do that.
Yeah.
What I think is tragic is when they take that beautiful thing and turn it into a reason to kill each other,
Oh
right?
God,
It's pretty
yes.
simple to me, right? Because if that wasn't a part of our actual present day history, where that wasn't happening, because it's happening everywhere. We were watching it in probably in parts of Africa, I'm sure, where it's like religiously motivated to some extent. Now, whether we say it out loud or not, we know that Israel's is for them is about their Zionism and about them believing that they have the right to all that land.
Mhm.
Um, because the Bible says so. Like that's where the God delusion book is super interesting to me, is because it talks very factually about those things. It's not
Right
like,
on.
hey, it's more about wanting people to actually try and think
Yeah,
about it for themselves, to be like, hey, well, does
100%.
this really make sense to you? You know?
Man, oh man. I feel like we could
Yeah.
talk all day, but I'm gonna just say thank you for this
Oh.
wonderful discussion. Obviously, we have a lot to unpack, but I'm
Mhm.
hoping that folks who are listening, are thinking a little more critically about addiction,
Mhm.
anti-queerness, forced religion,
Yeah.
just because like these are things working on and unpacking in the most constructive, healthy way that we can. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you, coming on here and being able to talk about these things and showing the hypocrisy of colonialism, racism, ableism, all of the things. So,
Yeah. Because
mhm.
it's all connected, right? Well, thank you for
Yes.
having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate you very much. I hope I didn't like ramble too out of bounds or out
No.
of the realm of understanding because I tell you, like some of these realities are very like important to me, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and not in some side way. Like they're very important in a very real way, you
Yeah.
know. And being able to share with you what I shared last night for the first time in public,
Mm.
like to me, like knowing that that's a part of me accepting me, right? Is
Yeah.
being like, no, what I really, really want, I don't know who that man is because I don't, I'm single and alone, very alone now that Floyd's gone, although I have
Mm.
his shirt on today.
Oh.
Um, but I just, it's so nice to be able to do that. Thank
Yeah.
you for creating that space. I really
Oh,
do appreciate that.
so honored to, and so honored to chat
Thank
with
you.
you. And we're in such solidarity when it comes to harm reduction and helping people unpack trauma in order
Yeah.
to combat their addictions and such. And me too.
Yeah. Like we're all in this together, right?
Yeah,
We're all in this
exactly.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dave. I
Thank you.
appreciate you. So
I
for folks,
appreciate you.
oh, so much, so
Sorry.
much. No, don't be. So for folks, Dave did mention our book club here for a minute, and we just finished an amazing anti-Black report that the Senate had done. So I am following up with a message to them, despite this prorogue, what's happening with the 11 recommendations, and that's not including the 165 from 1999. That the only thing got implemented was more funding for the Canadian human rights. Regardless, our next book is Braiding Legal Orders, Implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And this is many different authors put together here who are all international law experts, faculty of law. And this is a fantastic book. I'm really looking forward to unpacking it next month. I hope you all consider it. And today is the 11th. So as of today, Trump has given us 25% tariffs off of aluminum and steel. And, so we are definitely in a world of having a conversation where colonizers from the States want to take us over, which brings me to November's book, Arc of the Medicine by Tony Rees. This talks about the border between Canada and the US and how it was designed and made. And for someone with a geomatics background, that is just interesting to me. But in this moment of international crisis brought on by Trump, this may be a book that matters to you all. I want to give a massive shout out to the Reconciliation Action Group. These are a group of settlers and a few Indigenous of us leading them to try to do positive, constructive work in this world. And they had put out some fundraising for the Valentine's Day March that's happening on Friday. Here in Calgary, it's at the Scarborough Church at 6:30. It is the 17th annual march. So the original one that started out on the West Coast, that's been going on for more years than that. And we'd love for you to join us. And if you are listening anywhere across Canada, chances are your Indigenous community is having a Valentine's Day March to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous loved ones. It is for all Canadians. So technically, all the Canadians who are listening who have lost loved ones, this is for you too. I just don't know if you'll honor your people quite the same when capitalism tells you to go for dinner and buy flowers and do all these things. So I hope you reconsider decolonizing your Valentine's Day and joining us. Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my granny, my mom, of what strength looks like through your examples. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt in settler circles. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture she has with her Austrian family and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her. I'm second generation. Thank you to my husband for producing and editing this show. On top of being my husband, my childhood friend, the father of our child, and my support down this journey of life, he has witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, We are blessed to learn from you daily. We are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person and hopefully create a better world for the next generations. I hope my family will be proud of us trying to discuss these present day issues. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my name in Sot. My humblest apologies to all the language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. For all people, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian Podcast, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at YYC or nativeyyc at gmail.com, where you can send in your comments, your questions, or send me an e-transfer. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And the last thing I want to do is always a touch grass moment. And I think there's been lots of really fun things that we've been seeing lately. Kendrick Lamar just did this Super Bowl halftime show. I think the political commentary that has come from that to teach us all about oppression dynamics, the game of the Americans, and just witnessing Black joy. Shout out to Serena Williams. Those were things that filled my heart, and I
Mhm.
appreciate that. And the last thing I always say is, you Calgary rabbits are lucky I'm not your dish, or you'd be in my dish. Thanks, folks, for listening.